The Pearl Harbor advance knowledge conspiracy theory is the argument that U.S. government officials had advance knowledge of Japan's December 7, 1941, attack on Pearl Harbor. Ever since the Japanese attack, there has been debate as to how and why the United States had been caught off guard, and how much and when American officials knew of Japanese plans for an attack. In September 1944, John T. Flynn, a co-founder of the non-interventionist America First Committee, launched Pearl Harbor revisionism when he published a 46-page booklet entitled The Truth About Pearl Harbor. Several writers, including journalist Robert Stinnett, retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Robert Alfred Theobald, and Harry Elmer Barnes have argued various parties high in the U.S. and British governments knew of the attack in advance and may even have let it happen or encouraged it in order to force America into the European theater of World War II via a Japanese-American war started at the back door. Evidence supporting this view is taken from quotations and source documents from the time and the release of newer materials. However, the Pearl Harbor advance knowledge conspiracy is considered to be a fringe theory and is rejected by most historians. 10 official U.S. inquiries. The U.S. government made 9 official inquiries into the attack between 1941 and 1946, and a 10th in 1995. They included an inquiry by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, 1941, the Roberts Commission, 1941–42, the Hart Inquiry, 1944, the Army Pearl Harbor Board, 1944, the Naval Court of Inquiry, 1944, the Hewitt Investigation, the Clark Investigation, the Congressional Inquiry, Pearl Harbor Committee, 1945–46, a top-secret inquiry by Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, authorized by Congress and carried out by Henry Clausen, the Clausen Inquiry, 1946, and the Thurman Spence Hearing, in April 1995, which produced the Dorn Report. The inquiries reported incompetence, underestimation, and misapprehension of Japanese capabilities and intentions, problems resulting from excessive secrecy about cryptography, division of responsibility between Army and Navy, and lack of consultation between them, and lack of adequate manpower for intelligence, analysis, collection, processing. Investigators prior to Clausen did not have the security clearance necessary to receive the most sensitive information, as Brigadier General Henry D. Russell had been appointed guardian of the pre-war decrypts, and he alone held the combination to the storage safe. Clausen claimed, in spite of Secretary Stimson having given him a letter informing witnesses he had the necessary clearances to require their cooperation, he was repeatedly lied to until he produced copies of top-secret decrypts, thus proving he indeed had the proper clearance. Stimson's report to Congress, based on Clausen's work, was limited due to secrecy concerns, largely about cryptography. A more complete account was not made publicly available until the mid-1980s, and not published until 1992 as Pearl Harbor, Final Judgment. Reaction to the 1992 publication has varied. Some regard it as a valuable addition to understanding the events, while one historian noted Clausen did not speak to General Walter Short, Army commander at Pearl Harbor during the attack, and called Clausen's investigation notoriously unreliable in several aspects. Assertions that Japanese codes had already been broken. U.S. signals intelligence in 1941 was both impressively advanced and uneven. In the past, the U.S. Mi-8 cryptographic operation in New York City had been shut down by Henry Stimson, Hoover's newly appointed Secretary of State, citing ethical considerations, which inspired its now broke former director, Herbert Yardley, to write a 1931 book, The American Black Chamber, about its successes in breaking other nations' crypto traffic. Most countries responded promptly by changing, and generally improving, their ciphers and codes, forcing other nations to start over in reading their signals. The Japanese were no exception. Nevertheless, U.S. cryptanalytic work continued after Stimson's action in two separate efforts: the Army's Signal Intelligence Service, SIS, and the Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, Crypto Group. OP-20G cryptanalytic work was kept secret to such an extent, however, commands such as the 14th Naval District at Pearl Harbor were prohibited from working on code breaking by Admiral Kelly Turner as a consequence of the bureaucratic infighting in Washington. By late 1941, those organizations had broken several Japanese ciphers, such as J19 and PA-K2, called Tsu and Oit respectively by the Japanese. The highest security diplomatic code, dubbed Purple by the U.S., had been broken, but American cryptanalysts had made little progress against the IJN's current Kaigun Ango Sho D, Naval Code D, called and won by the U.S., JN-25 after March 1942. In addition, there was a perennial shortage of manpower, thanks to penury on one hand and the perception of intelligence as a low-value career path on the other. Translators were overworked, cryptanalysts were in short supply, and staffs were generally stressed. Furthermore, there were difficulties retaining good intelligence officers and trained linguists. Most did not remain on the job for the extended periods necessary to become truly professional. For career reasons, nearly all wanted to return to more standard assignments. However, concerning the manning levels, just prior to World War II, had some 700 people engaged in the effort and, in fact, obviously having some successes. Of these, 85% were tasked to decryption and 50% to translation efforts against IJN codes. The nature and degree of these successes has led to great confusion among non-specialists. Furthermore, OP-20GY analysts relied as much on summary reports as on the actual intercepted messages. The US was also given decrypted messages by Dutch, NEI, intelligence, who like the others in the British-Dutch U.S. agreement to share the cryptographic load, shared information with allies. However, the US refused to do likewise. This was, at least in part, due to fears of compromise. Sharing even between the U.S. Navy and Army was restricted. The eventual flow of intercepted and decrypted information was tightly and capriciously controlled. At times, even President Roosevelt did not receive all information from code-breaking activities. There were fears of compromise as a result of poor security after a memo dealing with magic was found in the desk of Brigadier General Edwin M. Pa. Watson, the President's military aide. Purple. The Japanese code dubbed Purple, which was used by the Foreign Office and only for diplomatic, but not for military, messages, was broken by Army cryptographers in 1940. A 14-part message using this code, sent from Japan to its embassy in Washington, was decoded in Washington on 6 and December 7. The message, which made plain the Japanese intention to break off diplomatic relations with the United States, was to be delivered by the Japanese ambassador at 1 p.m. Washington time, dawn in the Pacific. Colonel Rufus S. Bratton, then serving as an aide to Marshall, took this to mean that the Japanese intended to attack at dawn somewhere in the Pacific. Marshall ordered a warning message sent to American bases in the area, including Hawaii. Due to atmospheric transmission conditions, the message was sent out via Western Union rather than the usual signal channels and was not received until the attack was already underway. JN-25. The JN-25 super-encrypted code, and its cryptanalysis by the U.S., is one of the most debated portions of Pearl Harbor lore. JN-25 is the U.S. Navy's last of several names for the cryptosystem of the Imperial Japanese Navy, sometimes referred to as Naval Code D. Other names used for it include 5-numeral, 5-NUM, 5-digit, 5-figure, AN, JN-25 Able, and AN-1, JN-25 Baker, and so on. Super-enciphered codes of this sort were widely used and were the state of the art in practical cryptography at the time. JN25 was very similar in principle to the British naval cipher No3, known to have been broken by Germany during World War II. Once it was realized what sort of crypto system JN25 was, how to attempt breaking into it was known. Stinnett, in fact, notes the existence of a USN handbook for attacks on such a system, produced by OP20G. Even so, breaking any such code was not easy in actual practice. It took much effort and time, not least in accumulating sufficient cryptanalytic depth in intercepted messages prior to the outbreak of hostilities when IJN radio traffic increased abruptly and substantially. Prior to December 7, 1941, IJN radio traffic was limited, since the IJN played only a minor role in the war against China and therefore was only rarely required to send radio messages whatever the highest level crypto system might have been. As well, interception of IJN traffic off China would have been at best spotty. Rather oddly, however, the official history of JIP-1 shows nearly 45,000 IJN messages intercepted during the period from June 1, 1941 until December 4, 1941. Thus, most Japanese encrypted broadcast military radio traffic was army traffic associated with the land operations in China, none of which used IJN cryptography. Breaking a super-encrypted cipher like JN25 was a three-step process: A. Determining the indicator method to establish the starting point within the additive cipher, B. Stripping away the super-encryption to expose the bare code, and then, C. Breaking the code itself. When JN25 was first detected and recognized, such intercepted messages as were interceptable were collected, at assorted intercept stations around the Pacific by the Navy, in an attempt to accumulate sufficient depth to attempt to strip away the super-encryption. Success at doing so was termed by the cryptographers a break into the system. Such a break did not always produce a clear text version of the intercepted message, only a break in third phase could do so. Only after breaking the underlying code, another difficult process, would the message be available, and even then its meaning in an intelligence sense might be less than fully clear. When a new edition was released, the cryptographers were forced to start again. The original JN25A system replaced the blue code, as Americans called it, and used 5-digit numbers, each divisible by 3, and so usable as a quick, and somewhat reliable, error check, as well as something of a crib to cryptanalysts, giving a total of 33,334 legal code values. To make it harder to crack a code value, meaningless additives, from a large table or book of 5-digit numbers, were added arithmetically to each 5-digit cipher element. JN25B superseded the first release of JN25 at the start of December 1940. JN25B had 55,000 valid words, and while it initially used the same additive list, this was soon changed and the cryptanalysts found themselves entirely locked out again. Over the years, various claims have been made as to the progress made decrypting this system, and arguments made over when it was readable, in whole or part. Light Honest John Leitweiler, commander of Station Cast, the Philippines, stated in November 1941 that his staff could walk right across the number columns of the coded messages. He is frequently quoted in support of claims JN25 was then mostly readable. This comment, however, refers not to the message itself but to the super-enciphering additives and referred to the ease of attacking the code using a new method for discovery of additive values. The November 16, 1941 letter to L.W. Parks, OP20GY, sent by Leitweiler states, "We have stopped work on the period February 1 to July 31 as we have all we can do to keep up with the current period. We are reading enough current traffic to keep 2 translators very busy." Another document, Exhibit number 151, Memoranda from Captain L. F. Safford, from the Hewitt Inquiry, has a copy of the U.S. Navy message ONAV 242239 evaluation of messages of November 26, 1941, which has in part, 1 reference, a. advised that COM-16 intercepts were considered most reliable and requested COM-16 to evaluate reports on Japanese naval movements and send dispatch to ONAV, Info Sync Pack. COM-16's estimates were more reliable than COM-14's, not only because of better radio interception, but because COM-16 was currently reading messages in the Japanese Fleet Cryptographic System, 5-number code or JN25, and was exchanging technical information and Japanese to English translations with the British CI unit at Singapore. Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum was aware of this, and it may have been part of his thinking when he drafted the McCollum Memo. Dwayne L. Whitlock, traffic analyst at CAST, was not aware before the attack IJN movement traffic code was being read. Reading in this context means being able to see the underlying code groups, not breaking out the messages into usable plaintext. The Hewitt Inquiry document also states, the 5-numeral system, JN25B, yielded no information which would arouse even a suspicion of the Pearl Harbor raid, either before or afterward. The claim no pre-attack IJN message expressly mentioned Pearl Harbor is perhaps true. The claims that no purple traffic pointed to Pearl Harbor may also be true, as the Foreign Office was not well thought of by the military and, during this period, was routinely excluded from sensitive or secret material including war planning. It is also possible any such intercepts were not translated until after the attack, or indeed, after the war ended. In both instances, all traffic from these pre-attack intercepts has not yet been declassified and released to the public domain. Hence, any such claims are now indeterminate, pending a fuller accounting. Additionally, no decrypts have come to light of JN25B traffic with any intelligence value prior to Pearl Harbor, and certainly no such has been identified. Such breaks as recorded by authors W. J. Holmes and Clay Blair Jr., were into the additive tables, which was a required second step of 3, see above. The first 100 JN25 decrypts from all sources in date/time order of translation have been released, and are available in the National Archives. The first JN25B decrypt was in fact by Haipo, Hawaii, on January 8, 1942, numbered number 1 up JN25B RG38CNSG Library, Box 22, 3222/82 NACP. The first 25 decrypts were very short messages or partial decrypts of marginal intelligence value. As Whitlock stated, the reason that not one single JN25 decrypt made prior to Pearl Harbor has ever been found or declassified is not due to any insidious cover-up, it is due quite simply to the fact that no such decrypt ever existed. It simply was not within the realm of our combined cryptologic capability to produce a usable decrypt at that particular juncture. Detailed month-by-month progress reports have shown no reason to believe any JN25B messages were fully decrypted before the start of the war. Tallied results for September, October, and November reveal roughly 3,800 code groups, out of 55,000, about 7%, had been recovered by the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Detection of Japanese transmissions. There are claims that, as the Kido Butai, the striking force, steamed toward Hawaii, radio signals were detected that alerted U.S. intelligence to the imminent attack. For instance, the Matson liner SS Lurline, heading from San Francisco to Hawaii on its regular route, is said to have heard and plotted, via relative bearings, unusual radio traffic in a telegraphic code very different from international Morse which persisted for several days, and came from signal source, S, moving in an easterly direction, not from shore stations, possibly the approaching Japanese fleet. There are numerous Morse code standards including those for Japanese, Korean, Arabic, Hebrew, Russian, and Greek. To the experienced radio operator, each has a unique and identifiable pattern. For example, Kana, International Morse, and Continental Morse all have a specific rhythmic sound to the dit and da combinations. This is how Lurlene's radioman, Leslie Grogan, a U.S. Navy Reserve officer in naval communications, and with decades of maritime service in the Pacific, identified the muted signal source as Japanese and not, say, Russian. There are several problems with this analysis. Surviving officers from the Japanese ships state there was no radio traffic to have been overheard by anyone, their radio operators had been left in Japan to send fake traffic, and all radio transmitters aboard the ships, even those in the airplanes, were physically disabled to prevent any inadvertent or unauthorized broadcast. The Kido Butai was constantly receiving intelligence and diplomatic updates. Regardless of whether the Kido Butai broke radio silence and transmitted, there was a great deal of radio traffic picked up by its antennas. In that time period, it was not unknown for a radio signal to reflect from the ionosphere, an atmospheric layer. Ionospheric skip could result in its reception hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Receiving antennas were sometimes detected passively rebroadcasting signals that reached them, at much lower amplitudes, sufficiently low that the phenomenon was not of practical importance, nor even of much significance. Some have argued that, since the Kido Butai contained a large number of possible receiving antennas, it is conceivable the task force did not break radio silence but was detected anyway. Such detection would not have helped the Americans track the Japanese fleet. A radio direction finder, DF or RDF, from that time period reported compass direction without reference to distance. Moreover, it was common for the receiving stations to report erroneous reciprocal bearings. To locate the source, a plotter needed two such detections taken from two separate stations to triangulate and find the target. If the target was moving, the detections must be close to one another in time. To plot the task force's course with certainty, at least 4 such detections must have been made in proper time pairs, and the information analyzed in light of further information received by other means. This complex set of requirements did not occur. If the Kido Butai was detected, it was not tracked. According to a 1942 Japanese after-action report, in order to keep strict radio silence, steps such as taking off fuses in the circuit, and holding and sealing the keys were taken. During the operation, the strict radio silence was perfectly carried out. The Kido Butai used the radio instruments for the first time on the day of the attack since they had been fixed at the base approximately 20 days before and proved they worked well. Paper flaps had been inserted between key points of some transmitters on board Akagi to keep the strictest radio silence. Commander Genda, who helped plan the attack, stated, "We kept absolute radio silence. For 2 weeks before the attack, the ships of Kido Butai used flag and light signals, semaphore and blinker, which were sufficient since task force members remained in line of sight for the entire transit time." Kazuyoshi Koichi, the communications officer for Hiei, dismantled vital transmitter parts and kept them in a box that he used as a pillow to prevent Hiei from making any radio transmissions until the attack commenced. Lieutenant Commander Choichi Yoshioka, communications officer of the flagship, Akagi, said he did not recall any ship sending a radio message before the attack. Furthermore, Captain Kijiro, in charge of the Kido Butai's 3 screening submarines, stated nothing of interest happened on the way to Hawaii, presumably including signals received from the supposedly radio-silent Kido Butai. Vice Admiral Rinosuke Kusaka stated, "It is needless to say that the strictest radio silence was ordered to be maintained in every ship of the task force. To keep radio silence was easy to say, but not so easy to maintain." There is nothing in the Japanese logs or after-action report indicating that radio silence was broken until after the attack. Kusaka worried about this when it was briefly broken on the way home. The appendix to the war-initiating operational order is also often debated. The message of November 25, 1941 from CINC Combined Fleet, Yamamoto, to all flagships stated, "Ships of the Combined Fleet will observe radio communications procedure as follows. 1. Except in extreme emergency, the main force and its attached force will cease communicating. 2. Other forces are at the discretion of their respective commanders. 3. Supply ships, repair ships, hospital ships, etc., will report directly to parties concerned." Furthermore, in accordance with this imperial operational order, the CINC of the Combined Fleet issued his operational order. The task force then drew up its own operational order, which was given for the first time to the whole force at Hitakapa Bay. In paragraph 4 of the appendix to that document, the especially secret strike force was specifically directed to maintain strict radio silence from the time of their departure from the inland sea. Their communications will be handled entirely on the General Broadcast Communications Net. In addition, Genda recalled, in a 1947 interview, Kido Butai's communications officer issuing this order, with the task force to rely, as might be expected, on flag and blinker. The original records of Lurleen surrendered to Lieutenant Commander George W. Pease, 14th Naval District in Honolulu, have disappeared. Neither Lurleen's log, nor the reports to the Navy or Coast Guard by Grogan in Hawaii have been found. Thus no contemporaneously written evidence of what was recorded aboard Lurleen is now available. Grogan commented on a signal source moving eastward in the North Pacific over several days as shown via relative bearings, which then bunched up and stopped moving. However, the directions given by Grogan in a recreation of the logbook for the Matson line were 18 and 44 degrees off from known strike force positions and instead pointed towards Japan. According to author Jacobson, Japanese commercial shipping vessels are the likely source. A recently discovered missing personnel report written by Grogan after the radio log had been passed to the 13th Naval District, dated December 10, 1941, entitled Record for Posterity, also does not support claims of Kido Butai broadcasting. The Japanese practiced radio deception. Susumu Ishiguro, Intelligence and Communications Officer for Carrier Division 2, stated, "Every day false communications emanated from Kyushu, i.e., the Japanese home islands, at the same time and same wavelength as during the training period." Because of this, Commander Joseph Rockefort of Hawaii Signals Intelligence concluded that the 1st Air Fleet remained in home waters for routine training. The ships left their own regular wireless operators behind to carry on routine radio traffic. Captain Sadatoshi Tomioka stated, "The main force in the inland sea and the land-based air units carried out deceptive communications to indicate the carriers were training in the Kyushu area." The main Japanese naval bases, Yokosuka, Kure, and Sasebo, all engaged in considerable radio deception. Analysis of the bearings from Navy DF stations account for claimed breaks of radio silence, and when plotted, the bearings point to Japanese naval bases, not where those Kido Butai ships actually were. Rockefort, with Huckins and Williams, states there were no dummy messages used at any time throughout 1941 and no effort by the Japanese to use serious deception. When asked after the attack just how he knew where Akagi was, Rockefort, who commanded Hypo at the time, said he recognized her same ham-fisted radio operators. The Japanese contend that radio operators were left behind as part of the deception operation. The critical DF tracked radio transmissions show bearings that could have not come from the strike force. Emissions monitored from CAST, or CAST's report Akagi was off Okinawa on December 8, 1941, are examples, though some transmissions continue to be debated. The contention that low-powered radio, such as VHF or what the U.S. Navy called TBS, or talk between ships, might have been used, and detected, is contradicted as impossible due to the tremendous distances involved, and when contact was lost, it was routinely presumed it was because low-powered radio and landline were being used. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests for specific RDF reports remain wanting. A more critical analysis of the source documentation shows that not one single radio direction finder bearing, much less any locating fix, was obtained on any Kido Butai unit or command during its transit from Psyche Bay, Kyushu to Hideakapa Bay and thence on to Hawaii. By removing this fallacious linchpin propping up such claims of Kido Butai radio transmissions, the attendant suspected conspiracy tumbles down like a house of cards. One suggested example of a Kido Butai transmission is the November 30, 1941, ComSum 14 report in which Rockefort mentioned a tactical circuit heard calling Maris, a term often used for commercial vessels or non-combat units. Further, the perspective of U.S. naval intelligence at the time was the significance of the term tactical circuit is that the vessel itself, that is Akagi, was using its own radio to call up the other vessels directly rather than work them through shore stations via the broadcast method, which was the common practice in Japanese communications. The working of the Akagi with the Maris indicated that she was making arrangements for fuel or some administrative function, since a carrier would rarely address a Maru. Also, from a U.S. Navy radioman on duty at Station AE, Station Able Easy, Sitka, Alaska, at the time of Pearl Harbor, Elmer H. France, states, "It is inconceivable to me that a force represented by the Kido Butai with 33 ships involved of all different types, and no radio communication blackout on orders, I just don't believe it." One story from author Constantine Fitzgibbon claimed that a letter received from VFW Cavendish Bentinck stated Britain's JIC met and discussed at length the impending Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. From a Joint Intelligence Subcommittee session of December 5, 1941, it was stated, "We knew that they changed course." I remember presiding over a JIC meeting and being told that a Japanese fleet was sailing in the direction of Hawaii, asking, "Have we informed our transatlantic brethren?" and receiving an affirmative reply. However, the author was incorrect. There was no session on December 5, nor was Pearl Harbor discussed when they did meet on December 3. Statements by high-ranking officials. One perspective is given by Rear Admiral Frank E. Beatty, who at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack was an aide to the Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox and was very close to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's inner circle, remarked that, "Prior to December 7, it was evident even to me, that we were pushing Japan into a corner. I believed that it was the desire of President Roosevelt, and Prime Minister Churchill that we get into the war, as they felt the Allies could not win without us, and all our efforts to cause the Germans to declare war on us failed. The conditions we imposed upon Japan to get out of China, for example, were so severe that we knew that nation could not accept them. We were forcing her so severely that we could have known that she would react toward the United States. All her preparations in a military way, and we knew their overall import pointed that way." Another eyewitness viewpoint akin to Beatty's is provided by Roosevelt's administrative assistant at the time of Pearl Harbor, Jonathan Daniels. It is a telling comment about FDR's reaction to the attack. "The blow was heavier than he had hoped it would necessarily be. But the risks paid off, even the loss was worth the price." 10 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Henry L. Stimson, United States Secretary of War at the time, entered in his diary the famous and much argued statement that he had met with President Roosevelt to discuss the evidence of impending hostilities with Japan, and the question was how we should maneuver them into the position of firing the first shot without allowing too much danger to ourselves. However, Stimson, in reviewing his diary after the war, recalled that the commanders at Pearl Harbor had been warned of the possibility of attack, and that the poor state of readiness that the attack had revealed was a surprise to him. General Short had been told the two essential facts: 1. A war with Japan is threatening, 2. Hostile action by Japan is possible at any moment. Given these two facts, both of which were stated without equivocation in the message of November 27, the outpost commander should be on the alert to make his fight. To cluster his airplanes in such groups and positions that in an emergency they could not take the air for several hours, and to keep his anti-aircraft ammunition so stored that it could not be promptly and immediately available, and to use his best reconnaissance system, radar, only for a very small fraction of the day and night, in my opinion betrayed a misconception of his real duty which was almost beyond belief. Stimson omits to mention the war warning message expressly told Short not to alarm the civilian population and to be alert for sabotage, which was widely expected to be a precursor to attack. Robert Stinnett's Day of Deceit suggests a memorandum.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.